I woke up to a bright red notice of violation taped to my dock gate, the lake still smelling of wet cedar. I'm Tom, 58, homeowner here, and my deed says it's mine. Why was the HOA waving the CCNRs at me? And that was just the beginning. By noon, the HOA golf cart had circled twice Karen at the wheel clipboard in hand. She didn't stop, just pointed at the dock and kept rolling. That's when I opened my file cabinet and pulled out the paperwork that could change everything. It was a Saturday morning in late spring, the kind of morning where the sunlight dances off the lake like spilled diamonds and the air smells faintly of wet grass. My coffee mug was warm in my hand as I stepped onto the back deck. The birds were doing their usual gossip session in the maple trees, and somewhere across the water I could hear the low hum of someone's outboard motor heading out for early fishing. That's when I saw it bright orange fluttering in the breeze taped right across my dock gate. It wasn't there last night. From the deck I could make out the blocky black letters at the top. Notice of violation. HOA font. HOA tone. My stomach tightened. You live in this neighborhood long enough, you start recognizing those things the way a soldier recognizes a uniform. I set my coffee down and walked down the gravel path toward the dock. As I got closer, I noticed fresh tire marks in the grass near the path, narrow ones with a little zigzag where they'd turned. Golf cart. HOA patrol had been here early. The notice was laminated because of course they don't want their threats to get ruined by a little lake spray and zip-tied right through my gate latch. The paper was already wrinkling under the rising sun, but the words were loud and clear. Your dock is in violation of HOA Rule 14b, encroachment on common waterfront property. Immediate removal is required. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day. My jaw clenched. Encroachment on common property. My dock. The one I've maintained for 20 years. I own every inch from my back fence to the waterline. Hell, my title deed says my property goes into the lake far enough to cover the whole slip. I pulled the laminated notice off the gate and flipped it over. They'd even included a highlighted section of the CCNRs, the HOA's beloved covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I recognized the section instantly. Rule 14b had nothing to do with docks like mine. It was meant for temporary floating platforms people sometimes tied to the community beach. Still there, it was printed and underlined as if repetition could make it true. This is what happens when power goes unchecked, I muttered under my breath. Behind me, a screen door creaked open. It was Ron from next door, retired, Navy sun-worn face holding his own coffee. You get one too, he asked. I held up the notice. Apparently my dock is public enemy number 1. Ron snorted. Karen's been circling like a shark all week. I saw her on the patrol cart yesterday. Clipboard and all. I didn't need to ask which Karen. Everyone in Lakeshore Estates knew her Karen McAllister, HOA president for the last 8 years, a self-appointed guardian of property values and personal vendettas. She could quote the CCNRs better than most lawyers, and she had the kind of persistence that could turn a molehill into a court case. I walked to the very end of the dock, the boards creaking under my feet. The water was glasses still reflecting the residents-only sign staked near the HOA's tiny common beach about 50 yards away. I'd always stayed on my side, respected the lines, and now they were accusing me of crossing them. I went back inside, dug my old property folder out of the filing cabinet, and laid everything out on the kitchen island: the title, deed, the plat map, the surveyor's notes from when I bought the place. I traced my finger along the printed lot boundary. It ran right to the shoreline, then extended in a faint dotted line into the lake, marking my exclusive use of the dock area. No gray zone, no shared space. Clear as day. I could feel my pulse in my temples. This wasn't just about a dock. This was about someone deciding they could rewrite the facts if it suited their agenda. And in HOA land, that was the start of a very slippery slope. By mid-morning, my irritation had curdled into something sharper. I took photos of the notice front back close-up of the zip-tie hole in my gate. Document everything. If there's one thing you learn living under an HOA, it's that the paper trail is your best weapon. As I was snapping the last shot, I heard it again, the faint electric whine of the HOA golf cart. I looked up, and there she was. Karen sitting ramrod straight in the driver's seat, wearing oversized sunglasses and a sun visor clipboard balanced on her lap. The cart slowed as she passed my property, and I could see her eyes flick toward me, then toward the now missing notice. I raised the laminated paper like a trophy. "We need to talk," I called out. She braked just far enough away to keep her tires off my driveway. All violations must be addressed at the monthly board meeting, she said, voice clipped. I have a deed that says otherwise. That's irrelevant. The rules apply to everyone. And then she was off the cart's taillights, winking as it bounced back toward the community center. I stood there for a long minute, the notice crinkling in my hand. Somewhere down the shore, the fishing boat's engine revved the sound carrying across the water. A pair of ducks landed near the dock, sending ripples against the pilings. Everything else about the morning was perfect except for the fact that my own HOA had just declared war on me. Sunday afternoons in Lakeshore Estates were supposed to be quiet. Lawn mowers tapered off, afternoon sprinklers clicked on in lazy arcs, and the smell of charcoal drifted between backyards. I had burgers sizzling on the grill, the lake glinting in the late-day sun, and a small group of friends gathered around the patio table. The calm lasted until I saw the familiar white HOA golf cart coming down the path like a slow-moving storm. I knew it was her before she even rounded the bend. That rigid posture in the driver's seat, the perfectly ironed khaki shorts, the oversized sunglasses. The clipboard in her lap was practically a badge of office. Karen McAllister, president of the HOA judge and jury of our lakeside community. She parked the cart halfway between my driveway and the dock path, blocking the narrow gravel lane as if to announce this wasn't a casual visit. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked toward her. Afternoon, I said, keeping my tone even. Karen didn't smile. We need to discuss your dock. Mr. Smith, she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. I could see the top sheet and enlarged printout of my laminated notice of violation, complete with her notes scribbled in red ink. We already have, I replied, nodding toward the patio where my friends had fallen silent. And I have documents that say my dock is entirely on my property. Karen stepped off the cart shoes, crunching on the gravel. Rule 14B of the CCNRs clearly states that no structure may extend into common waterfront space without board approval. I could practically recite that rule myself by now, and my title deed clearly states that my property line includes the slip. The dock's been here for 20 years longer than you've been HOA president. That's irrelevant, she said, lips tightening. The rules apply to everyone. I glanced toward the lake. The residents-only sign near the HOA beach swayed gently in the breeze, a silent reminder of where their jurisdiction ended and mine began. But Karen had decided to move those lines in her head. Look, I said I'm all for following the rules, but I don't take kindly to threats taped to my property. We could have had a conversation first. She gave a short laugh, the kind that wasn't amused. We sent out a notice last year reminding all members about dock compliance. You must have missed it. Behind her, Ron had wandered over from his yard, coffee in hand again like yesterday. I saw that notice, he said. It was about temporary floats at the beach. Didn't say a word about private docks. Karen shot him a look that could cut glass. This doesn't concern you, Ronald. He raised an eyebrow. Everything in this neighborhood concerns me when you start rewriting the rules. My grill hissed in the background and the smell of charred beef hung in the air. I kept my voice steady. Karen, I have my deed, the plat map, and the survey. They're not opinions, they're legal documents. That's as may be, she said, but the board has voted to enforce compliance and your dock is in violation. You have until the next meeting to remove it. Something inside me snapped. This is exactly what happens when power goes unchecked, I said, meeting her gaze. You think because you've got a gavel and a golf cart you can overrule the county records? Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't flinch. The board acts in the best interest of the community. We can't have structures altering the aesthetic of the waterfront. I looked at my dock, weathered cedar planks, a couple of Adirondack chairs, and a simple ladder into the water. Hardly an eyesore. Funny, I said nobody complained until you decided to make it an issue. From the patio, one of my friends called burgers are ready, but I didn't move. Karen glanced toward the group, then back at me. This is your formal verbal warning. Expect it to be on the meeting agenda. And Mr. Smith, don't make this harder than it needs to be. With that, she climbed back onto the golf cart. The electric motor gave a soft whir as she pulled away clipboard still balanced on her knees. She didn't look back. I stood there a moment, the sound of the cart fading into the hum of cicadas. My irritation had shifted from a simmer to a slow boil. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the way she delivered it in front of neighbors as if the verdict had already been handed down. Ron shook his head. You better bring that deed to the meeting. She's not going to let this go. I'll bring it, I said, and I'll make sure everyone sees it. Back on the patio, the conversation had turned awkward, everyone picking at their plates. I tried to shake it off, but my eyes kept drifting toward the dock. The sun was setting low, casting gold across the water, and for the first time in years, I felt like my own property was under siege. The monthly HOA meeting was always scheduled for the third Thursday, 6:30 p.m., sharp in the community center. I usually avoided them unless something important was on the agenda, mostly because they tended to drag on for hours about things like shrub height and acceptable mailbox colors. This time, I knew I had to be there. Karen had practically promised my dock would be on the chopping block. The sun was just dipping behind the row of pines as I pulled into the lot. The smell of fresh-cut grass still lingered from earlier that afternoon, and the faint sound of frogs carried over from the lake. The community center was lit up like a small-town courthouse yellow glow spilling from the windows, the HOA's official residents-only sign posted just inside the glass door, a not-so-subtle reminder of who belonged and who didn't. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of crock-pot chili and powdered coffee. Potluck night. A long folding table was lined with slow cookers, paper plates, and stacks of store-bought cookies. People milled around balancing bowls and making small talk. The only sound louder than the chatter was the sharp whack of Karen's gavel against the podium as she called the meeting to order. "All right, everyone, please take your seats," she announced, her voice carrying with practiced authority. She wore a bright red blazer tonight, HOA power color, and her ever-present clipboard was now paired with a 3-ring binder of CCNR's tabs sticking out like battle flags. I slid into a metal folding chair near the middle of the room. Ron nodded to me from a few rows back. He had that brace-yourself look in his eyes. The first half hour went by in the usual Hayes Committee updates about landscaping, a reminder about 4th of July parade volunteers, a tedious discussion about the community tennis court resurfacing. My mind wandered toward the plat map and title deed tucked in my leather folder at my feet, waiting for their moment. Then Karen cleared her throat and said, "Next agenda item, dock encroachment." Her eyes flicked toward me like a searchlight finding its target. She launched right in, flipping a page on her clipboard. "It has come to the board's attention that certain docks are extending into common waterfront space in violation of Rule 14B of our CCNRs." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. She held up a laminated copy of the Notice of Violation, my violation, like it was Exhibit A in a trial. As you can see here, she continued tapping the page. "The board is responsible for maintaining uniform use of our shoreline for all residents." "Excuse me," I said, standing. "That notice is based on incorrect information. My dock is entirely within my property boundary. The county records," Mr. Smith Karen cut in, rapping the gavel twice. "We'll have time for comments after the board discussion." The gavel crack echoed through the metal chairs, and I felt the heat rise in my neck. This wasn't discussion, it was theater, and she was directing the scene. A board member I barely knew, Harold something, chimed in. "The board proposes issuing a special assessment to cover removal costs for docks in violation if the owners fail to comply voluntarily." "That's not happening," I said, but Karen's gavel came down again. "Please," she said with a tight smile, "let's maintain order." From the back, Ron's voice broke in. "Order? How about accuracy? That dock's been there for decades and it's on his deed. You can't just rewrite the property lines because you don't like where they are." Karen ignored him, flipping open her CCNR's binder to a tabbed page. "Rule 14B clearly grants the board authority to regulate waterfront structures." She angled the book toward the audience like a preacher showing scripture. "That rule applies to common areas," I said louder this time. "My dock isn't on common property. The title deed says so, the plat map says so, and the county's GIS map says so. That's 3 sources more reliable than your binder." A couple of neighbors exchanged glances. 1 or 2 even nodded. Karen's eyes narrowed. "The board will proceed with a vote to approve the special assessment." "Hold on," I said, stepping into the aisle. "You can't just slap a fee on me without proof of violation. This is exactly what happens when power goes unchecked. You start thinking your authority is absolute." That got a few murmurs. Someone at the chili table even clapped once before stopping. Karen banged the gavel again, the sound sharp enough to make the front row flinch. "All in favor," she called out. 3 hands went up the usual inner circle. All opposed, half a dozen hands. A few abstentions. Karen's lips tightened, but she wrote something on her clipboard. "The board will revisit this matter next month," she said. "Mr. Smith, you are still under formal notice until this is resolved." I sat back down, my pulse hammering. The meeting moved on to lawn fertilizer guidelines, but my mind was still locked on that laminated notice and the way she'd waved it like a banner. When the meeting finally adjourned, the smell of chili had gone stale and the room was thinning out. Ron caught up with me by the door. "She's doubling down," he said. You better come loaded for the next round. I will, I said, patting the folder under my arm. Next time, the whole neighborhood's going to see the real map. Outside, the air was cooler, the moon throwing silver across the lake. The residents-only sign glinted in the lamplight by the community dock standing guard over territory that wasn't hers to claim. I got in my truck, knowing the fight was far from over. By the Monday morning after the meeting, I'd had enough. The laminated notice of violation still sat on my kitchen counter, curled at the edges like a constant reminder that Karen's clipboard wasn't going to back down on its own. I'd been polite, I'd been factual, and it hadn't made a dent. If she wanted to drag this into official channels, fine, I'd bring my own. I called my attorney, Mark Jensen, a no-nonsense property lawyer in town with the kind of reputation that made HOAs hesitate before pushing too far. He'd handled my neighbor's boundary dispute last year and shut it down so cleanly the other side never even filed an appeal. Bring me everything, Mark said over the phone. Deed plat, survey the notice they gave you any correspondence. And take photos, lots of them. By 9 a.m., I was in his office downtown. His place was in a converted craftsman house with the faint smell of lemon polish in the air. I spread my folder's contents across his oak desk, the original title, Deed, a crisp copy of the plat map, the surveyor's certification from the county, and the HOA's laminated violation notice, complete with Karen's underlining. Mark adjusted his glasses, looked at the notice, then at me. Rule 14b, huh? I've seen this play before. She's reading it out of context. It only applies to common area docks. That's what I've been saying since Saturday, I told him. She just waves her CC&R's binder like it's the Constitution. He smirked. In HOA land, the binder is the Constitution until you bring the real law into the room. Mark dictated a letter on the spot, his assistant typing so fast her nails clicked against the keys like hail on a tin roof. It was short, direct, and pointed. Stated my dock was on privately owned property, peer-recorded deed, and county plat. Cited easement law, confirming the HOA had no authority over my slip. Demanded immediate withdrawal of the violation within 72 hours. Warned that further action would result in a lawsuit for harassment and defamation of title. When the draft was done, Mark read it aloud. His voice steady. We trust this matter will be resolved amicably and without the necessity of judicial intervention. Then he looked at me. That's lawyer code for back off or get sued. We signed it, had it notarized, and sent it certified, mail signature required. Mark's assistant placed the green USPS return receipt card on top of the stack like a trophy. Driving home, the late morning sun shimmered on the lake. The breeze carried that clean mineral smell you only get near water. For the first time in days, I felt like the ground under my feet was solid again. That feeling lasted until I got home and checked my email. There at the top of my inbox was a community update from the HOA. The subject line, Important Notice, regarding dock compliance. I clicked it open. Karen's words were as careful as they were infuriating. The board is committed to maintaining fairness and uniformity in our community. Some members have expressed concerns regarding docks that may not conform to the standards outlined in our governing documents. Please be advised that the board will be following through on all necessary compliance measures to preserve property values for everyone. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. In a neighborhood of only 47 homes with lake access, everyone knew exactly whose dock was suddenly the star of the HOA email. This is what happens when people think authority is the same thing as ownership, I muttered. I stepped out onto the deck looking toward the dock. The afternoon light flashed off the residents-only sign by the HOA beach, almost mocking me. My dock, solid and weathered, sat exactly where it had for 2 decades. The only thing that had changed was the paper trail and the temperature of the politics. Ron hollered over the fence. Got your email yet? Yep, I said. She's spinning it for the crowd. She's trying to make it sound like you're the one threatening property values, he said, shaking his head. Never mind that half the shoreline looks like a junkyard in spring. I laughed despite myself. Well, the certified letter's on its way. She's about to find out the CC&Rs don't outrank the county courthouse. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder still open, rereading the deed by lamplight. There was something oddly comforting about seeing it in black and white. Lot 12 Lakeshore Estates boundaries extending to the established high water mark inclusive of existing dock structure. Clear as daylight. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from USPS item delivered. Signature obtained. The letter had landed. By Wednesday morning, I was done playing defense. The certified letter was in Karen's hands, but I wasn't going to wait around for her reply. I wanted the kind of proof that even the most stubborn HOA board couldn't argue with. That meant going straight to the Source City Hall. It was a bright, clear morning, the kind where the lake looked like a sheet of blue glass and the smell of damp pine drifted through the open truck window. Driving into town, I passed the familiar landmarks Tom's Diner, the old feed store, turned antique shop the courthouse with its white columns and flag snapping in the breeze. City Hall was just around the corner, a modest brick building with a bronze plaque and double glass doors. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. A receptionist sat behind a tall counter tapping at a keyboard. "Morning," I said, setting my folder down. "I need to pull the recorded plat map for Lot 12 Lakeshore Estates, and, if you have it, the original survey from the year it was platted." She raised an eyebrow but slid a sign-in sheet toward me. "Research room's through that door. Records clerk will help you." The clerk was a silver-haired man named Dave, the kind of guy who'd been working there long enough to know every filing cabinet by heart. I explained the situation short version and watched a slow grin spread across his face. "HOA trouble, huh?" "You're not the first," he said, pushing back from his desk. "Let's find your lot." We walked down a narrow hallway lined with steel cabinets. Dave pulled a drawer open and flipped through oversized folders until he found one stamped Lakeshore Estates, 1985. He laid it on the big drafting table in the center of the room. The plat map was printed on heavy, yellowing paper, the ink just starting to fade. But the boundaries were clear. Lot 12 ran from the street all the way down to the shoreline with a faint dotted extension into the lake itself labeled Private Dock Area. Dave traced the line with his finger. "See that? That's the high water mark. Everything inside, it's yours. Docks included." "That's exactly what I needed," I said, snapping photos with my phone. He dug a little deeper, pulling out a copy of the recorded easements, only one for utility lines along the street. "Nothing about the HOA having riparian rights over your section of the shoreline," Dave added. I could feel my irritation shift into a steady satisfaction. This wasn't just my opinion anymore, it was a matter of public record. As I was gathering the copies, Dave leaned against the table. "If they give you any trouble, tell them to come down here and look for themselves. Maps don't lie, but people sure try." On the drive back, I stopped at the lakeside park for a moment. From there, you could see the HOA beach and its bright white residents-only sign. The irony wasn't lost on me. My dock was private property, but theirs was the one fenced off from the rest of the world. When I got home, I spread the new documents across the kitchen island next to the laminated notice of violation and my own deed. Together, they told the story in black and white: my dock, my property, my rights. Ron came over after lunch, curiosity pulling him across the yard. "So, what did you find?" I grinned and held up the plat map. "The smoking gun. County records confirm it docks inside my boundary. Always has been." He chuckled. "You gonna show her at the next meeting?" "Not just her," I said. "The whole room. If she wants a spectacle, she's going to get one." That night, as the sun dipped low and the lake caught fire with orange light, I sat out on the dock with a cold drink. The boards felt warm under my bare feet, and the water lapped gently against the pilings. Somewhere across the way, I heard the faint metallic clink of someone lowering a boat into the water. I thought about the gavel's crack at the last meeting, about Karen's clipped voice quoting the CCNRs about the way she held that laminated notice like it was a badge. And I thought about Dave's words at City Hall maps: "Don't lie, but people sure try." This time, the map was on my side. The night of the next HOA meeting, the parking lot at the community center looked like the Friday night fish fry. Cars lined both sides of the street, and you could hear the buzz of voices even before you stepped inside. Word had spread, people wanted to see the dock drama unfold. I came armed. Leather folder under one arm, rolled up copy of the City Hall plat map in my hand, and my phone ready with a slideshow of every document zoomable down to the inch. If Karen wanted a spectacle, I was ready to give her one. Inside, the smell of coffee and reheated chili hit me again, same as last month. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the folding chairs were already filled with neighbors. Ron waved me over to a seat near the aisle. "Full house tonight," he said. "Half of them are here for you." At the front, Karen stood behind the HOA podium red blazer again, gavel resting like a weapon at her right hand. Beside her was that same tabbed CCNR's binder, a laminated notice of violation clipped to the top. She glanced up as I walked in, her smile as tight as the elastic on a jar lid. She opened the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, a few housekeeping announcements, and then, too quickly, next item, dock encroachment. I stayed seated, letting her go first. She read from a prepared statement about community standards and preserving the aesthetic harmony of the waterfront. The residents-only sign outside the HOA beach flashed through my mind. Funny how harmony always seemed to mean whatever she wanted it to. Finally, she said, "Mr. Smith, you may address the board." I stood, a leather folder in one hand, rolled plat map in the other. My voice carried better than I expected. "Last month, you claimed my dock extended into common waterfront property. You issued this." I held up the laminated notice and cited Rule 14B of the CCNRs. A few heads turned toward Karen's binder. "But here's the problem." I continued unrolling the plat map and spreading it across the front table. "This is the original 1985 City Hall record for Lakeshore Estates Lot 12. It shows my property boundary extending to the high water mark, including the dock slip. That means it's mine, not the HOA's." I pointed to the faint dotted line Dave had shown me. "This isn't opinion. This is recorded public legal fact." A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see Ron nodding in the back. "And just so there's no confusion," I said, flipping open my folder, "here's my title deed, the certified survey, and the county's GIS map, all showing the same boundary." Karen's jaw tightened. "The board interprets Rule 14B as giving us I cut her off. Rule 14B applies to common property. My dock isn't on common property. That's why I went to City Hall. Because when people think authority is the same thing as ownership, you get overreach." That line landed. Someone in the third row actually clapped. Others murmured in agreement. Karen banged the gavel sharp loud, trying to regain control. "Order, please." I looked straight at her. "This is exactly what happens when power goes unchecked. You cite rules without proof, hope no one questions it, and count on the rest of us to roll over. But the law trumps the bylaws. Every single time." The room went still for a moment, then more applause, scattered but real. Even Harold, the board member from last month, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Karen tried again. "The board reserves the right to follow the law I finished for her, and the law says you don't own my dock." She banged the gavel again, cheeks flushed. "This meeting is adjourned," but she was too late. The tide in the room had already shifted. People were standing talking to each other, looking at the plat map, asking to see the deed. Ron came forward and slapped me on the shoulder. "You just gave them a free civics lesson." As I packed up my papers, I caught Karen slipping the laminated notice back into her binder. She didn't meet my eyes. Outside, the evening air smelled like fresh-cut grass and the lake glowed in the moonlight. The residents-only sign by the HOA beach gleamed under the lamppost, but for the first time it didn't feel like it was aimed at me. The week after the showdown felt strangely calm. No golf cart patrol creeping past my driveway. No laminated notices flapping in the breeze. No emails from the HOA with subject lines that read like legal threats. It was almost too quiet. On Wednesday morning, I stepped out onto the deck with my coffee. The lake was calm sunlight dancing on the ripples. Somewhere down the shoreline, I could hear the thunk of someone's dock ladder dropping into the water. The residents-only sign by the HOA beach was still there, catching the light, but for once it wasn't followed by the sight of Karen pacing nearby with her clipboard. When I opened my mailbox later that morning, I found the usual assortment of bills and catalogs. But tucked in the middle was a single sheet of HOA letterhead. No envelope, just folded in thirds. I unfolded it on the spot. The language was as sterile as it was telling the board has reviewed the matter concerning the dock at Lot 12. After further consideration, the notice of violation issued on date has been withdrawn. No further action will be taken at this time. That was it. No apology. No admission they'd been wrong. Just a quiet reversal buried in careful wording. I could almost hear Karen dictating it tight-lipped, making sure every sentence left the door open for her to claim she'd been acting in the best interest of the community. When I walked back up the drive, Ron was leaning on the fence. "Got your letter?" he asked. "Yep," I said, holding it up. "Violation's gone. Dock stays." He grinned. Bet she hated signing that one. Later that day, the HOA sent out a community update email. Buried between reminders about the summer picnic and new speed limit signs was one line. "A recent compliance matter has been resolved amicably." They didn't use my name, but everyone knew. By dinner, 3 different neighbors had stopped by just to say hi and ended up congratulating me. One even brought over a plate of cookies like I'd just had a baby instead of winning a property dispute. Still, I noticed the difference. Karen's golf cart didn't linger near my yard anymore. At the next mailbox run, she was there but kept her eyes fixed on the box, fumbling with her keys until I was gone. The CCNR's binder she used to carry around like a security blanket was nowhere in sight. But the irritation lingered. She'd put me through weeks of hassle, painted me as a problem in front of the neighborhood, and never once admitted she'd been wrong. This was a retreat, sure, but it wasn't an apology. That night, I sat out on the dock again, the boards warm from the day's sun. The smell of cut grass drifted from somewhere up the hill, mixing with the faint tang of lake water. A pair of ducks paddled by, unbothered by boundary lines. I thought about the gavel's crack at that meeting, the laminated notice of violation she'd waved like a trophy, the residents only sign by the HOA beach standing guard over a piece of shoreline she actually did control. And I thought about how close she'd come to convincing everyone that the lines on a map didn't matter if she said otherwise. "This is what happens when power goes unchecked," I said quietly to no one in particular. The difference now was I'd checked it. 2 Saturdays after the HOA quietly withdrew the violation, the neighborhood hosted the summer cookout. The kind of event where folding tables groaned under potato salad, kids darted between lawn chairs with popsicles, and the smell of barbecue hung heavy in the warm air. It was the first time in weeks that the whole neighborhood gathered without the undercurrent of tension about dock compliance. But, even with the sunshine and the hum of small talk, I knew the story had already made the rounds. People didn't forget a gavel slam or a public accusation. I set my cooler down under the shade of a maple tree and made my way toward the food line. Along the path, I passed the community bulletin board, the same one where Karen had once posted laminated reminders about HOA dues and decorative plant height limits. There, pinned dead center, was the residents-only notice for the HOA beach. The edges were curling from the heat, the red letters just starting to fade. I couldn't help but think about how that sign and my laminated notice of violation had both been used the same way to draw a line that didn't actually exist. Ron waved me over to a picnic table. "You think Karen's gonna show?" he asked, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "She'll show," I said. "She doesn't miss a chance to represent the board." Sure enough, 15 minutes later, the familiar white HOA golf cart rolled up. Karen stepped out wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat instead of her usual visor, and holding, of course, a fresh copy of the CCNR's binder. She didn't come to my table, didn't make eye contact, but I could feel her presence like static in the air. By mid-afternoon, the cornhole boards were set up, kids were running in and out of the sprinkler, and neighbors had settled into their small clusters. I found myself telling the story to a new couple who'd just moved into Lot 9. They were polite, but wide-eyed the way people get when they realize they've joined an HOA without fully reading the bylaws. Biggest thing, I told them: keep your paperwork, every scrap, the deed, the plat map, the surveys, because someday someone's going to tell you the rules say one thing when the law says something else entirely. The husband nodded. "We've dealt with overreach before. In our last place, they tried to fine us for planting the wrong kind of tree." I laughed. "At least a tree can't float into common property." From across the lawn, Karen's voice floated over as she talked to another group, cheerful and loud enough to be overheard. It was all resolved amicably. I almost choked on my sweet tea. Ron caught my expression. "Don't let her rewrite the ending," he said quietly. I shrugged. "She can spin it how she wants. Everyone here saw the map. They know the truth." As the afternoon wound down, I walked the short path from the park to my dock. The sun was lower now, casting gold across the lake. The boards under my feet still held the day's warmth, and the smell of wet wood and lake water rose up with every step. I sat in one of the Adirondack chairs and watched the reflection of the sky ripple in the water. In my mind, I could still see the laminated notice of violation taped to my gate, the crack of the gavel cutting me off mid-sentence, the way Karen's CCNR's binder had been held up like gospel. That was the irritation tier in full swing, weeks of defending what was mine from someone who thought authority and ownership were the same thing. But here now, it felt different. The dock was still mine. The records were still on my side, and the neighbors who mattered knew exactly how it had ended. I'd checked the overreach, and I'd done it without losing my cool enough to give them something to use against me. Ron wandered down the path, beer in hand. He leaned on the railing. "You think she'll try something else?" I smiled. "Probably. That's what happens when power goes unchecked. It keeps looking for a new place to plant its flag." He took a sip, nodded toward the horizon. "Then I guess you just keep your flag planted right here." The breeze shifted, carrying the faint smell of someone's grill from up the hill. Somewhere near the HOA beach, the residents-only sign caught the last flash of sunlight before the shadow from the pines swallowed it whole. The truth was, this fight had been about more than a dock. It was about the idea that in a small community, rules can be twisted if no one speaks up. And it was about the fact that every homeowner, no matter how long they've been here, needs to know the paper that proves their rights before they need to use it. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and let the lake breeze cool the day off. If Karen came for the dock again, I was ready. And if she came for someone else's property, I'd be just as ready. In neighborhoods like ours, property lines aren't just about fences and docks, they're about dignity, peace of mind, and knowing where you stand. A home is more than wood and shingles. It's the place you've built your life, your memories, and your sense of belonging. When a dispute comes along, especially with an HOA, it's easy for emotions to take over. But the real power lies in staying calm, knowing your rights, and letting the paperwork speak louder than anger. We owe it to ourselves and to our neighbors to keep those lines of respect as clear as the ones on a plat map. That means reading the governing documents, showing up to meetings, and insisting on fairness without letting it turn into a shouting match. In my case, it was the deed, the survey, and the records from City Hall that kept the conversation grounded in facts. Due process matters, and so does the way we treat each other while we work things out. If you've ever had a Karen moment with your HOA or a neighbor where the notice on your door didn't match the truth, I'd like to hear about it. Have you ever sat through a board meeting where the rules felt flexible? What's your best tip for keeping the peace while still standing your ground? Share your story below, because the more we talk about it, the stronger our communities become.